Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the French Connections Tuesday edition. This is an addendum edition. After all of you know that we did a wonderful interview with Ted Pike on the Talmud, on the problems of pedestry in the Talmud, and it was a very interesting and educational 1 hour talk we had. And now we're going to follow up that discussion on this Tuesday, the third day of October 2006, with a friend of mine. It's his third time, I believe, or maybe fourth time on the French Connection. His name is John DeCamp. He's a ex-senator from the state of Nebraska. He is a researcher and a lawyer, a writer, a fighter for the truth. In fact, he's put himself in harm's way, not only in his early career in Vietnam, but also as a politician that ended up having. He went up against the big guys in Nebraska as a state senator, and also against the elites as a defender of a young man named Paul Bonacci in the Franklin cover-up. And he wrote a book called The Franklin Cover-Up that has been actually well received over the years as being a powerful indictment of what goes on in the halls of power, both in Washington and around the country. So I'm going to bring him up right now. John, are you with me?
I am indeed.
Nice to have you back, John. You know, this is percolating to the top of the news cycle once again. And as I mentioned to you privately, it seems like this is their control mechanism, and they're going to do this. They're going to hang this guy Foley out to let the others under their control know that not to mess around. It seems. Yeah,
you almost wonder if he isn't a visible sacrificial lamb, but then who knows?
Well, since, you know, the events of your case, I remember you telling me clearly that at first, when you started looking into these facts, there was nothing in your person that would believe the story that this young man told you. Yet, as you dug into it, what did you find, John, as you dug deeper?
Well, we'll start at the beginning. You said it right. In fact, that's how I got involved, because when some strange stories started filtering on the street from these young people after this Franklin credit union had been raided back when the credit unions were collapsing and all kinds of terrible things were occurring. I was one of the first ones that stood up publicly and said, well, this all has to be just a lot of fantasy and nonsense, because if anybody really seriously believed the stories that are coming out on the street from these kids, I said, well, if you really believed it, I said, then I'd be the first one to step forward and insist we do something about it. But this is like La Land. Well, I got a letter from some kid that had been arrested on the night of the Franklin raid, when the feds raided the credit union, and he had been picked up that night and put in jail on some spurious grounds that he touched, kind of like Foley, that he touched his cousin on the outside of his pants in the wrong place or something. Anyway, and so the kid wrote me a letter and said, well, Mr. DeCamp, I read your stuff and heard about you, and if you'd come talk to me, I could tell you where to find some stuff that would prove it's not just fantasy or La Land like you claim. And I thought, well, I better put my actions where my mouth has been. So I went to Omaha, where he was locked up, and visited with him, and he had some strange stories. But more important than anything else, some things that locations he told me where he had hidden certain things. And if I'd go and look at those places, I'd find these things. One of them was a set of diaries, and ever since he was a little boy, his grandfather had taught him to keep a diary, and so he kept a diary of everything. And so I thought, well, heck, I'll go check that out. And I went and found these diaries, just like he said they would be hidden in this place. And first thing I did, though, was I went and took him to one of a group of these companies that analyzes writing and printing and ink and all that to see if it's legitimate or whatever. And they came back and they concluded, yeah, this is all kinds of different inks, because some of it didn't exist in this year and others did. Anyway, one thing led to another, and some of the stories then he had written in there, I started checking out, and pieces fell into place, and unfortunately then I was in the midst of it and representing and defending the kid, and I went from there on and on and on and on.
And you found there were other kids involved here, weren't there? Like with this girl Kimberly and Nellie. Did you ever speak to these two?
I think I did. Now remember, this all started it's close to
85.
85, 86. It got really heavy in 88, 9, 91. Anyway,
right.
I'm sure I did. I just don't remember all the kids I spoke to now, and I'm pretty cautious about saying anything if I don't absolutely remember it or have it documented somewhere, as you well know from previous experience.
Yeah. Well,
everything I did write in that book. When the book first came out, by the way, I don't know if I told you this, but a bunch of fairly prominent people whose names you'd recognize, had some lawyers have a press conference, and they said, well, this was the most libelous, horrible thing that had ever been written, or on and on and on, and that this man, DeCamp, would be sued and his bar or, lawyer license taken away, and libel and slander and on and on and on. So I immediately had a press conference right afterwards. I said, hey, I just happen to agree with these guys that these are the worst, most terrible things anybody could say about anyone, and so on and so forth. I said, however, these people all know, and the lawyers all know, that there is one magic thing, the first thing you learn in law school, that, quote, truth. Truth is an absolute defense to any claims of slander or libel. And I said, in this case, I'm ready to prove every single thing I wrote, and if I can't prove it, I didn't say it. And of course, there were no lawsuits against me or for the book.
And no subsequent attacks against your license either, were there?
No, they tried. They tried everything. But anyway. So as I've said often since I wrote that book, and it's all happened and got so deeply involved, I truly can say I wish I never knew any of this. I wish I never knew this existed. I think it was a prettier, happier, better world before I knew.
Yeah, well, the fact is, unless we face the rot within our system, we're all going to become victims of these kinds of things. So
I know, and my children, of course, were all growing up during these years. From every one of them had scary things, and they still harbor scary things as a result of it. We talk about it a lot more now, but at the time they were scared. I mean, truly scared that somebody would show up, because we had so many incidents where people disappeared, kids disappeared, and ended up.
How many people were disappeared as a result of this investigation?
I only know about, I think I listed maybe 15 or 20 at the end of the book. And then, of course, there's been more since that last part of that book. There was, for example, one of the most prominent ones of all, walked into a hospital, I believe it was in New Mexico here. Oh, was it a year and a half ago, I might have been. A kid named Troy Boner was one of the central figures of the book, and he's waving the book. And he's screaming, they're after me because of this book. And the hospital personnel calmed him down and put him in a room and thought he was, kind of, hysterical, and obviously. Anyway, the next morning they came in, he was sitting in the chair, bleeding out the mouth, quite dead. So who knows?
Yeah.
And so many of them like that.
Well, and we had Rusty Nelson involvement, and we also had Hunter Thompson. What can you tell us about Hunter Thompson's involvement in this?
I do not know Hunter Thompson. I never met him personally. However, he was one of the characters, at least a couple kids identified as being directing some of these I hate to say it, but porn snuff films of children where a child is actually literally killed or sacrificed in kind of a ceremonial, almost a satanic cult type thing. And it was interesting that what happened to Mr. Thompson. Who knows the real story there?
Well, if he was directing the actual killing of children, what he got was his just desserts. I just wish we got the story before it happened.
Yeah. Well, I certainly had my story out before.
Yeah.
Before it happened about Hunter Thompson, and anyway.